A frightfully large number of South Africans want to move to the UK. My friends, what happens if the UK becomes South Africa? Stop laughing in the background because there's an article we're going to discuss that makes exactly that claim.
South Africans don't really understand Europe because they know of the Europe of their ancestors. They know of the Europe that was from once gone. The problem is that is not England, that is not Europe. The idea, the conception that people have from Europe about South Africa and South Africans about Europe doesn't match the reality.
So in essence, what the author is saying is that the nationalized services of South Africa are poor because the people running them are poor, i.e. through catered deployment. But in Britain, the privatized services are very poor as well, mainly for exactly the same reason. Now, Byron, you used to live in Britain for a very long time. Tell us about those services and whether they are actually good or not.
What the UK tries to promote is a degree of competition, right? So, if you have more providers giving out electricity and selling it, then they should, in theory, compete on price. Price of electricity should go down. That's the theory, right? But the problem is that when it gets to a state, every individual needs electricity. So what ends up typically happening is that the government will legislate certain things around the cost of electricity. So the government, as an example, went forward a couple of years ago and basically implemented a price cap on electricity. The problem with that inevitably comes this. If you wish to run a private entity virtually at a loss for the purposes of a public good, it is technically not possible because remember, it's a private entity. Many government departments and many entities within the state are run at a loss, but they run at a loss with the backing and guarantee of the fiscus or the finance, the treasury, effectively. And they do this because it's a social good. In other words, you need it for the society.
And what the author of this article does say is that the state fails to maintain and improve infrastructure while allowing the asset stripping of national wealth by private interest. So at the end of the day, he's saying who needs criminal elements in the state when you have hedge funds and private equity firms? So you have this weird combination of state services supplied by the private sector, backed up by treasury, but at the end of the day, it becomes a sort of a patronage network like any other. The opposite of South Africa, but it leads to the same thing. It leads to a terribly inefficient and poor state.
I think the easiest way to consider what's going on here, Ramon, is it's like reciprocal. Like they always say, history's a circle. It always goes round and round in circles. It always starts in one second and ends up in another. But the destination always becomes the same. I think South Africa is just at a different part of the circle. We're at the bottom. Britain's at the top. So we're going to switch. Britain's going to come to the bottom. So as our energy sector privatizes, Britain's energy sector will nationalize. And then no doubt after a period of nationalization, they'll fuck it up and they'll have to privatize it again.
So we keep saying on the show, South Africa's like 30 years ahead of the rest of the world in terms of privatization of state utilities. And the privatization in South Africa is not done because it's a policy, it's because it's a necessity. It's a requirement. If you don't nationalize energy production, you will have blackouts. For those who are wanting to go to Britain to live, apparently, because it's a great place to live, apparently. I don't know why you would think that, but just consider something very, very important. So there's no point leaving South Africa today for your children to suffer in 30 years' time. It is much easier to stay in South Africa and fix it based on general principles of privatization, which are already taking place, if you know it or not, right in front of your eyes. I'd rather fix South Africa because it's much easier to fix. Fixing Britain in 30 years' time, who knows how complicated that would be.
Okay, look, let's be clear when we say that South Africa is the easier thing to fix. Let us be clear as to why. In South Africa, when the unemployment rate goes higher, we go, it's Tuesday, huh? When we implement stage 8 load shedding, we go, sounds like Thursday. Oh, well. In the UK, when you increase the unemployment rate by 0.5%, the shock to the system is too much. It causes national degrees of anarchy. There's a very famous case where load shedding was in a small little village in the UK for 15 minutes. And basically, it was due to a storm. But there was a national inquiry on it. People absolutely went mental. Their brain blew up. They couldn't understand what this thing of, grid went down. Stores were looted. in 15 minutes. Imagine every time we had stage 8 in South Africa, we just looted all the stores. I mean, come on, man. We only do that every 3 years or so. I mean, we call it July peaceful protest. Here it's a sport. I mean, it's not like, load shedding, loot. Yeah. This isn't bloody, some kind of movie somewhere, the purge. There's no purge going on in South Africa. But I suspect when they implement degrees of load shedding in the UK, which will happen, why? Because the government isn't investing and maintaining existing infrastructure. This is a global problem. We keep saying it. The more you look around the world, the more you realize infrastructure in America, in Canada, in Australia, it's all crumbling because government doesn't have the money to continue to maintain it. And so all we're seeing in South Africa is we're at a much further along on the road. But do not for one second believe that the road being traveled by South Africa is not the same road everybody else is on. You're just further down the road, mate. But because we're further down the road, we're more weathered to the hazards of the road.
So think of it this way. We had 40 years of an industrialized economy, roughly, during the course of the Nat regime. Britain has had 250 years of an industrialized economy. Once that breaks apart, the shock is going to be so great that I'm not too sure Britain will be able to exist. The shock to South Africa has been fantastically great as well, don't get me wrong, but it is far less of a shock than what's going to happen anywhere else in the world when that time arrives for those particular developed countries. So once again, when we say that South Africa is 30 years ahead of everyone else, it really is, and therefore much easier to fix than anywhere else.